Hello everyone and welcome back to Mysterious Murmurs. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off I'd love it if you could leave a comment, letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story 1. The House That Eats Dreams. The house stood at the end of a long, overgrown driveway, its blackened shutters staring like empty eye sockets into the surrounding forest. The Carlson family had driven 3 hours from the city to escape their cramped apartment, drawn by the promise of space, fresh air, and a new start. Laura Carlson, the mother, had fallen in love with the listing, a charming fixer-upper, the ad called it. In truth, it was a crumbling, ancient house with peeling paint and an eerie stillness that felt alive. As they stepped out of the car, their youngest, Mia, tugged on Laura's hand. "I don't like it here, Mom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Laura forced a smile and brushed her daughter's dark curls from her face. "It just needs a little love, sweetheart," she replied. But even Laura felt a shiver crawl up her spine as the wind whistled through the trees, carrying with it a faint, almost human sound. Inside, the house smelled of damp wood and something faintly metallic. David, the father, laughed nervously as he flicked on the dim overhead light in the living room. The bulb cast long, flickering shadows on the walls, revealing faded wallpaper patterned with flowers that seemed to writhe in the unsteady glow. "Cozy, isn't it?" David joked, but no one laughed. Mia clung to her mother's leg, her wide eyes fixed on the far corner of the room. When Laura followed her gaze, she saw nothing, just an old armchair draped in a dusty sheet. That night, they unpacked as much as they could and settled into their new home. Laura tucked Mia into bed, kissing her forehead and pulling the thick quilt up to her chin. "Sweet dreams," she whispered, but Mia didn't respond. She was staring at the closet door, which stood slightly ajar. Laura frowned and crossed the room, shutting it firmly. "All safe," she said, but Mia still didn't look convinced. Laura's own sleep was restless. The mattress was hard, and the wind outside seemed to howl louder as the night deepened. At some point, she thought she heard footsteps in the hallway, light and hurried, but when she sat up, the house was silent. David snored softly beside her. She convinced herself it was just her imagination and lay back down. But her dreams were strange and vivid. She dreamt of wandering the house, opening door after door, each room darker than the last. In one, she found Mia standing by a window, staring out at the forest. When Laura called her name, Mia turned, her face pale and blank. Then, Laura woke with a start, her heart pounding. The next morning, over breakfast, Mia was unusually quiet. "Did you sleep okay, honey?" Laura asked, but Mia only nodded, stirring her cereal without eating. David was already busy making plans for renovations, rattling off a list of repairs he wanted to tackle. "We'll have this place looking great in no time," he said with forced cheerfulness. Laura smiled weakly, but she couldn't shake the unease that lingered from her dream. Days passed, and the house seemed to grow darker, as if it absorbed the light. David worked on fixing the leaky roof, while Laura focused on cleaning out the musty rooms. One afternoon, as she was scrubbing the bathroom tiles, she heard Mia talking in her room. Curious, she wiped her hands and headed down the hall. "Who are you talking to, sweetie?" she asked as she opened the door. Mia was sitting on the floor, her dolls arranged in a circle around her. "My friend," Mia said without looking up. Laura's brow furrowed. "What friend?" Mia pointed to the corner of the room. Laura's heart skipped a beat. The corner was empty. "There's no one there, Mia," she said gently, but her daughter shook her head. "She says you can't see her," Mia replied, her voice matter-of-fact. That night, Laura confided in David. "It's just her imagination," he said, brushing it off. "She's adjusting to the new place." Laura nodded, but deep down she wasn't so sure. She had started hearing things too, whispers late at night, faint and unintelligible, as if coming from the walls themselves. Once, while cleaning the attic, she thought she heard someone breathing behind her, but when she turned, she was alone. The turning point came one evening when Mia didn't come down for dinner. Laura found her sitting on her bed, staring at the closet door. "What's wrong, Mia?" Laura asked, but her daughter didn't answer. Instead, she pointed at the closet. Laura hesitated, her hand trembling as she reached for the doorknob. When she opened it, she found nothing but Mia's clothes and toys. She let out a shaky laugh. "See? There's nothing to be afraid of." But Mia didn't look reassured. "She hides when you come," she said. That night, Laura stayed awake long after David had fallen asleep. She couldn't stop thinking about what Mia had said. Around 2 a.m., she heard a creak in the hallway, followed by a faint giggle. Her heart raced as she slipped out of bed and opened the bedroom door. The hallway was dark, but at the far end, she thought she saw a shadow move. "Mia?" she called softly, but there was no response. She took a step forward, then another, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. When she reached Mia's room, she found the door wide open. Inside, the bed was empty. Panic surged through her as she searched the room. "Mia!" she shouted, her voice echoing through the house. Suddenly, she heard a soft thud from downstairs. She raced down the stairs, nearly tripping in her haste. In the living room, she found Mia standing in front of the old armchair, her face pale and her eyes wide. "What are you doing down here?" Laura demanded, but Mia didn't answer. She was staring at the chair. Laura followed her gaze, and for a moment, she thought she saw the sheet shift, as if something underneath it had moved. David dismissed the incident as sleepwalking, but Laura wasn't convinced. Over the next few days, she noticed other strange occurrences, the lights flickering even after David had fixed the wiring, doors opening on their own, and a growing sense that they were being watched. Mia's imaginary friend became more demanding, according to her daughter. "She wants us to stay forever," Mia said one afternoon, her voice unnervingly calm. "She doesn't like when people leave." One night, Laura woke to find Mia standing by the window, just like in her dream. "Mia, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice shaking. Mia turned slowly, her face blank. "She's hungry," she said. Before Laura could respond, the house groaned, a deep, guttural sound that seemed to come from the very walls. The days blurred together after that. The house felt alive, its dark energy suffocating. Laura found herself losing track of time, waking up in places she didn't remember going to sleep. David, too, began to change, growing distant and irritable. One evening, as Laura was cleaning the kitchen, she glanced out the window and saw David standing in the yard, staring up at the house with a strange expression. When she went outside to ask him what he was doing, he simply said, "I think it's watching us." The final straw came when Laura found a diary hidden in the attic. It belonged to the previous owner, a woman named Eleanor, who had lived in the house alone for decades. The entries grew more erratic over time, describing strange dreams and an overwhelming sense of dread. The last entry read, It's hungry. It won't let me leave. I am part of it now." Laura's hands trembled as she read the words. Suddenly, she heard Mia scream from downstairs. She raced down to find Mia standing by the armchair again, her hand outstretched as if reaching for something. "Mia, stop!" Laura shouted, but as she crossed the room, the floor beneath her feet seemed to shift. She stumbled, falling to her knees, and when she looked up, she saw the armchair's sheets slide off. What lay beneath was not furniture, but something else entirely, something dark and pulsating, its surface slick and alive. It reached for Mia, and Laura screamed. The next thing she knew, she was lying on the floor, David shaking her awake. "Laura, what happened?" he asked, his voice frantic. She looked around, but the armchair was back in its place, the sheet neatly draped over it. Mia stood nearby, her face pale but unharmed. "It doesn't like you," Mia said softly, "but it wants me to stay." Laura knew then that they had to leave, but as she packed their bags in a frenzy, she couldn't shake the feeling that it was already too late. The house wouldn't let them go. And as they drove away the next morning, the house stood silent and still, its windows watching. Far behind them, Mia whispered from the back seat, "She says we'll be back." The house loomed at the end of a long, overgrown driveway, its silhouette jagged and menacing against the twilight sky. Its windows were like hollow eyes, black and watchful, framed by shutters that hung crookedly on rusted hinges. The forest around it pressed in close, ancient trees clawing at the air as if trying to reclaim the land. The Carlson family had driven 3 hours from the suffocating bustle of the city to this isolated spot, their hearts heavy with hope for a new beginning. The air here was thick, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, but beneath it lingered something sharper, metallic and cold, like the edge of a blade. As they stepped out of the car, the silence was deafening, broken only by the faint rustle of leaves and the distant caw of a crow. Mia, their youngest, clutched her mother's hand tightly, her wide eyes fixed on the shadowy outline of the house. "I don't like it here, Mom," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Laura knelt beside her, brushing a stray curl from Mia's face and forcing a smile. "It just needs a little love, sweetheart," she said, though her own chest felt tight with unease. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying a sound that was almost a voice, soft and pleading. Inside, the house was worse. The air was heavy and stale, filled with the scent of mildew and something faintly sour, as though the walls themselves were rotting from within. Dust coated every surface, and cobwebs draped the corners like forgotten lace. David flicked on the living room light, and the bulb sputtered to life, casting weak, flickering shadows that danced across the faded wallpaper. The pattern was an ornate floral design, but the flowers seemed wrong, their shapes twisted and unnatural. Laura stared at them, her stomach twisting as the shadows made the petals seem to writhe. Mia clung to her mother's leg, her gaze fixed on the far corner of the room. "What's wrong, sweetie?" Laura asked, her voice soft but strained. Mia didn't answer. Her eyes were wide and unblinking, and when Laura looked to where she was staring, she saw only an old armchair draped in a sheet. The fabric was yellowed with age, its edges frayed and stained. It looked utterly ordinary, but the sight of it sent an inexplicable chill down Laura's spine. That first night was restless for all of them. The mattresses were thin and uncomfortable, and every creak of the house seemed amplified in the silence. The wind outside howled like a wounded animal, rattling the loose shutters and sending an eerie whistle through the cracks in the windows. Laura awoke several times, each time convinced she had heard something. Light footsteps in the hallway, a door creaking open, a faint, stuttering whisper. When she finally drifted into a fitful sleep, her dreams were vivid and suffocating. She dreamt of wandering the endless hallways of the house, the walls closing in on her as she opened door after door. Each room was darker than the last, and in one, she found Mia standing motionless by a window. When Laura called out to her, Mia turned slowly, her face pale and her eyes hollow. Laura awoke gasping, her heart racing as if she had been running. The next morning, the unease lingered like a shadow over the breakfast table. Mia was unusually quiet, picking at her cereal without eating. Her skin looked paler than usual, and dark circles smudged the delicate skin beneath her eyes. Laura tried to coax her into conversation, but Mia only shrugged, her gaze distant. David, ever the optimist, launched into a list of repairs he wanted to tackle, his voice too loud in the otherwise silent room. "We'll have this place looking great in no time," he said with forced cheerfulness, but the words felt hollow. The days blurred together, each one marked by the oppressive presence of the house. Laura spent hours cleaning, scrubbing away years of grime and dust, but no matter how much she worked, the house never felt clean. It was as if the dirt and decay were part of its very structure, woven into the wood and stone. David worked tirelessly on the roof, cursing under his breath as he struggled with warped shingles and rusted nails. Mia spent most of her time in her room, playing quietly with her dolls, but Laura often caught her staring into the empty corners, her lips moving as if she were talking to someone unseen. One afternoon, as Laura was scrubbing the tiles in the upstairs bathroom, she heard Mia's voice drifting down the hallway. It was soft, almost a sing-song, and she was speaking in a tone Laura had never heard before. Curiosity mingled with unease as she wiped her hands on a towel and made her way to Mia's room. The door was slightly ajar, and Laura peeked inside. Mia was sitting cross-legged on the floor, her dolls arranged in a perfect circle around her. She was speaking softly, her head tilted as if listening for a response. "Who are you talking to, sweetie?" Laura asked, pushing the door open. Mia looked up, startled, her eyes wide and glassy. "My friend," she said simply. Laura's heart skipped a beat. "What friend?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light. Mia pointed to the corner of the room. Laura turned, her breath catching in her throat, but the corner was empty. "There's no one there, honey," she said, but Mia shook her head. "She says you can't see her," Mia replied, her voice matter-of-fact. That night, Laura lay awake long after David had fallen asleep. Her mind raced, replaying Mia's words over and over. The wind outside seemed to moan, pressing against the windows like a living thing. Around 2 a.m., Laura thought she heard a faint giggle, high and childlike, echoing through the house. She sat up, her heart pounding, and listened intently. The sound came again, soft and fleeting, as if carried by the wind. Gathering her courage, she slipped out of bed and into the dark hallway. The air was cold, and the wooden floor creaked beneath her feet. At the far end of the hallway, Mia's door stood slightly ajar. A thin strip of light spilled out onto the floorboards, flickering like candlelight. Laura's breath caught in her throat as she approached, her bare feet silent on the floor. She pushed the door open slowly, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the room was dimly lit by the moonlight streaming through the window. Mia stood in the center of the room, her back to the door. Her hair was tangled, and her nightgown hung loosely on her small frame. She was whispering softly, her words too quiet to understand. "Mia?" Laura called, her voice trembling. Mia turned slowly, her face pale and her eyes wide. "She's hungry," Mia said, her voice flat and emotionless. Suddenly, the house groaned, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate through the walls. Laura froze, her blood turning to ice. The sound was unlike anything she had ever heard, a low, guttural noise that was almost organic, like the deep growl of some enormous creature. Mia's gaze shifted to the closet, and Laura followed it, her stomach twisting with dread. The door was slightly ajar, and from within came a faint, wet sound, like something slithering over the floorboards. Laura's instincts screamed at her to run, to grab Mia and get as far away from the house as possible. But she was rooted to the spot, her body paralyzed with fear. As she stared at the closet, the door creaked open wider, revealing nothing but darkness. A chill swept through the room, and Laura felt an invisible weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Suddenly, Mia's face broke into a small, unsettling smile. "She says you can't leave," she whispered.
If you've enjoyed this journey into the unknown, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have a tale of your own or a legend you'd like us to explore? Let us know. You might just hear it next. Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. Because here, the darkness is always waiting just for you.